The massive galactic entertainment station stretched across space like a glittering metal city. Ships from every corner of the galaxy docked at its countless ports. Sleek silver vessels from the ice worlds, organic podships that pulsed like living hearts, and mechanical cube transports that moved in perfect formation. Tonight was special. The Great Talent Exhibition happened only once every 100 years. Deep inside the station's entertainment deck, Hannah Kim sat on a small bench. Backstage, her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she held her wooden flute. At 69, she never imagined she would be this far from Earth, surrounded by creatures she had only seen in documentaries. The backstage area buzzed with activity. The eight-legged creature practiced juggling glowing orbs. A being made entirely of liquid metal stretched and reformed into different shapes. Giant insect-like performers clicked and chittered as they prepared their dance. Hannah felt very small and very human. Dot through the translucent walls, she could see the main auditorium. Thousands of seats floated in midair, each one adjusted for different alien body types. Some seats were filled with water for the aquatic species. Others glowed with radiation for the energy beings. The crystalline Vex occupied an entire section, their bodies catching and reflecting the station's lights like living diamonds. They made soft chimming sounds that Hannah realized was their version of excited chatter. The floating orb entities drifted above the crowd like jellyfish in an invisible ocean. Their translucent bodies pulsed with different colors, and Hannah noticed they pulsed faster when something amused them. Right now, they were practically throbbing with what she assumed was laughter. "Why did they pick me?" Hannah whispered to herself, running her fingers along the smooth wood of her flute. Her husband Minho had carved it for her 40 years ago, back when Earth was still isolated and humans thought they were alone in the universe. The wood was from an old oak tree in their backyard in Seoul. Minho used to joke that it contained all the music of Earth's forests. Juno Park paced nervously nearby, his young face pale with worry. As Earth's ambassador, he was barely 30, and already carried the weight of humanity's reputation on his shoulders. He kept checking his translation device and smoothing down his formal Earth diplomatic uniform. "Hannah, you don't have to do this," Juno said for the 10th time. "I can tell then you're sick. We can send our acrobatic team instead." Hannah looked at him with tired but determined eyes. "Child, they specifically asked for me, the blue one, Kira." She made it very clear. The old human female who makes the primitive sounds through the backstage monitors. They watched Kira glide across the main stage. Her blue skin shimmered under the lights, and her fur eyes scanned the audience with practiced showmanship. She was beautiful in an alien way, tall and graceful, with flowing movements that reminded Hannah of underwater dancers. "Tonight, honored beings of the galaxy." Kira's voice carried perfectly through the station's advanced sound system. "We present curiosities from the newest species to join our cosmic community. Humans are quaint. They still use primitive tools and make sounds with their mouth holes for entertainment." The audience erupted in what Hannah assumed was laughter. The Vex beings clinked like wind chimes in a storm. The orb entities flashed so brightly the automated systems dimmed the lights. Even the mechanical drone collective, usually silent and efficient, emitted electronic sounds that their translation devices labeled as amusement. Juno's hands clenched into fists. "They're treating us like zoo animals." A massive roboticon descended from the ceiling, carrying a platform with a performer from the gas giant worlds. The being looked like a living tornado with eyes, spinning and creating elaborate patterns with colored gases. The crowd cheered appreciatively. This was the level of performance they expected. Hannah watched a few more acts. A creature that looked like a walking tree created an entire forest on stage in minutes. A being made of pure light painted pictures in the air with its own body. Each performance was more spectacular than the last. using technologies and abilities that seemed like magic to human eyes. "I taught music to children for 40 years, Hannah said quietly. "I've seen students overcome stage fright, bullies, family problems, everything. Music has power, Juno. Not the flashy kind these aliens have, but real power." She stood up slowly, her joints creaking. The backstage assistant, a floating robot with multiple arms, approached her with a small device. "Human performer, please. Attach translation amplifier." It said in a mechanical voice. Hannah clipped the device to a simple earth dress. She had chosen to wear her favorite hanbok, the traditional Korean dress her mother had given her, among all the high-tech costumes and natural alien appearances. She looked like someone from Earth's ancient past. "They think we're primitive," she said, more to herself than to Juno. "Maybe we are. But primitive doesn't mean powerless." The backstage lights dimmed, and Kira's voice boomed across the station again. "And now, the human curiosity. Watch as this elderly creature attempts what they call music using only air and a carved plant." Material, the stage doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Hannah stepped into a world that made her feel like an ant walking into a cathedral. The performance area stretched out before her like a small planet, its surface made of some material that shifted between solid black and swirling galaxies. Above her head, holographic nebulas slowly rotated, casting purple and gold light across the audience that seemed to go on forever, the moment her feet touched the stage floor. The noise hit her like a physical wave. Thousands of alien voices created a symphony of mockery. The crystalline Vex beings produced sounds like breaking glass mixed with wind chimes. But somehow she knew they were laughing. The insect-like chittering swarm rubbed their wings together in rapid bursts that their translation devices converted to snickering sounds from the floating VIP section. Massive whale-like creatures called the deep singers let out low rumbling, sounds that made the entire station vibrate. Even they were amused by the tiny human walking alone across the vast stage, their young ones, smaller creatures only the size of earth elephants, squeaked and clicked in what was clearly their version of giggles. Hannah felt her legs shake, but she forced herself to keep walking toward the center of the stage. Each step echoed through the amplification system, making her footsteps sound loud and clumsy compared to the graceful movements of the previous performers. In the judges section, 5 beings from different corners of the galaxy sat on floating thrones that adjusted to their unique body types. Zent, the cybernetic judge, was the most intimidating. Half of his body was original organic material from his home world, but the other half was advanced machinery that gleamed silver and blue. Cables ran from his skull to a processing unit that floated beside him, constantly analyzing everything he experienced. His mechanical eye focused on Hannah with the precision of a telescope, while his organic eye showed what she recognized as barely hidden amusement. When he spoke, his voice came through both his natural throat and electronic speakers, creating an unsettling harmony. "Citizens of the galaxy," Zent announced. His words automatically translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. "We now witness the curious human attempt at what they call music. Observe how they use only lung capacity and a carved piece of their planet's vegetation." The audience's laughter grew louder. In the diplomatic section, Hannah could see Juno covering his face with his hands. The other Earth representatives looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. This was supposed to be humanity's introduction to galactic culture, and it was turning into a cosmic joke. The Hive Collective occupied an entire section of the auditorium. They weren't individual beings, but rather thousands of small creatures that shared one consciousness. Their bodies looked like metallic insects, each no bigger than a human hand. But together they formed complex patterns and shapes, Right now, they had arranged themselves into what Hannah realized was a giant pointing finger, all of them focused on her with their tiny glowing eyes. The collective consciousness spoke through all them at once, creating a sound like 1,000 whispers. Such a primitive species, the hive whispered in unison, still using individual bodies, still making mouth noises for pleasure. Even Dex, who was supposed to be the diplomatic representative of the cloud beings, couldn't hide his amusement. Cloud beings were pure energy contained in a roughly humanoid shape. And Dex's form kept shifting colors and becoming less solid as he struggled, not to burst into whatever passed for laughter among his people. Clouds of sparkling mist leaked from his edges, a sign that he was losing control of his professional composure. The robotic drone collective watched her with mechanical precision. Unlike other species, they didn't laugh or show emotion, but their optical senses all focused on her with what felt like scientific curiosity to them. She probably looked like a primitive biological machine attempting to create vibrations in the air for no logical purpose. From the aquatic section, the water dancers pressed their faces against the transparent walls of their tanks. These beings looked like living water sculptures, constantly flowing and reshaping themselves. Even they seemed to ripple with amusement as they watched the small human woman standing alone on the massive stage. Hannah reached the center of the performance area, where a small circle of light marked the optimal position for the audience to hear her. The mockery was so loud now that the station's automated systems had to adjust the acoustics to prevent damage to sensitive alien hearing organs. She looked up at the thousands of faces, eyes, optical senses, and energy patterns all focused on her. Some beings she couldn't even identify, their forms so alien that her human brain struggled to process what she was seeing. A creature that looked like a living constellation twinkled with what might have been laughter. Something that resembled a walking mountain made deep rumbling sounds that shook the floor. For a moment, Hannah felt the weight of representing all of humanity pressing down on her shoulders. These beings had traveled between stars when humans were still living in caves. They had technologies that could reshape planets and create life from nothing. What could one old woman with a wooden flute possibly show them? But then she remembered Minho's words from long ago. Music isn't about being perfect, Hannah. It's about being honest. She closed her eyes, blocking out the vast audience and the swirling cosmic backdrop in her mind. She was back in her small classroom on Earth, with children who needed to hear something beautiful. She raised the wooden flute to her lips, feeling the familiar smooth surface that Minho's hands had shaped with such care. The first note emerged clear and pure, cutting through the mockery like a blade of starlight slicing through the darkness of space. The melody that emerged from Hannah's wooden flute was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. It began with Rirong, the ancient Korean folk song her grandmother Bora had hummed while cooking rice in their small kitchen back on Earth. But as the notes flowed through the vast auditorium, something magical happened. Hannah wasn't just playing. The old song, she was telling the story of humanity's journey to the stars. The opening notes spoke of mountains and valleys on a blue world far away. They carried the scent of cherry blossoms in spring and the sound of children playing in Seoul's ancient streets. But then the melody shifted, growing deeper and more complex. It spoke of the first time humans looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. It carried the dreams of astronauts and the tears of families watching rockets disappear into the black void. At first, the alien audience continued their mockery. But something strange began to happen. The laughter started to fade like echoes. In a cave, one by one, different species fell silent as the music reached parts of their consciousness they had forgotten existed. The crystalline Vex beings were the first to change. Their bodies, made of living crystal that normally produced sharp, precise sounds, began to vibrate in harmony with Hannah's flute. The resonance started with just one Vex in the front row, its crystal body humming softly. Then the vibration spread like ripples in a pond. Soon, entire sections of Vex were creating harmonies they had never produced before, their bodies becoming living instruments that turned Hannah's simple melody into a symphony. Floating orb entities, who had been pulsing rapidly with amusement, began to slow their rotation. Their bioluminescent cores, which normally flashed in chaotic patterns, started pulsing in rhythm with the music. As the melody spoke of loneliness in the vast emptiness of space, their lights dimmed to a soft, steady glow. When the music swelled with hope and determination, their cores blazed brighter than anyone had ever seen them shine. In the VIP section, the massive deep singers stopped their rumbling laughter. These ancient beings, each one the size of a small building, had witnessed the birth and death of stars. They communicated through sounds so deep that most species couldn't even hear them. But now they began to produce low, resonant tones that supported Hannah's melody like the foundation of a great cathedral. Their young ones, usually playful and loud, fell completely silent. Their huge eyes focused on the small human woman with an intensity that bordered on worship. Kira, the blue-skinned host who had introduced Hannah as a primitive curiosity, found herself leaning forward in a floating booth. Her four eyes, each capable of seeing different spectrums of light, were all focused on the human performer. This wasn't the crude noise-making she had expected. The melody carried something that her advanced civilization had engineered out of their culture centuries ago, and filtered emotion that hit her consciousness like a wave. The music told stories that transcended language. It spoke of the first human to leave Earth's atmosphere, and the overwhelming loneliness of seeing their home world shrink to a tiny blue dot. It carried the grief of species separation, when humans scattered across the galaxy and some never saw Earth again. But woven through the sadness was something else, an unbreakable thread of hope, a refusal to surrender to despair even in the face of impossible distances and alien indifference. Even the drone collective, beings who had replaced most of their organic components with mechanical precision, found their processing units working overtime. Their advanced computers were designed to analyze and categorize everything they encountered. But Hannah's music created patterns they couldn't quantify. Beauty wasn't supposed to be measurable. Yet here it was, flowing through their circuits and causing micro-fluctuations in their power systems that they couldn't explain. The robotic scouts that patrolled the station's perimeter began to slow their mechanical movements. For the first time in their programmed existence, they turned their attention away from their assigned duties to listen to something that served no logical purpose yet somehow felt essential. In the aquatic section, the water dancers pressed against their tank walls with unprecedented intensity. These beings, who existed in a constant state of fluid motion, found themselves holding still for the first time in their species' history. The music seemed to give form to their flowing existence, creating temporary stability in their endless dance. The Hive Collective, thousands of individual creatures sharing one consciousness, experienced something they had never felt before: individuality. As the melody spoke of personal loss and private hopes, some members of the collective began to move independently, their shared consciousness fragmenting into thousands of individual thoughts and feelings they didn't know how to process. Throughout the station, even beings who weren't in the auditorium began to stop what they were doing. In the docking bays, alien technicians paused their work on spacecraft. In the corridors, security robots stood motionless. The music was being transmitted through the station's communication system, and it was affecting every living and artificial intelligence within range. The melody reached a crescendo that told of humanity's greatest triumph: not their technology or their weapons, but their ability to create beauty in the face of suffering. It spoke of concerts held in refugee camps, of lullabies sung in hospital rooms, of street musicians playing for coins while wars raged around them. It was the sound of a species that refused to let hardship kill their capacity for joy. The notes filled every corner of the massive station. Something unprecedented happened. The advanced alien civilizations, each one dozens of years ahead of humanity in technology and evolution, realized they were witnessing something they had lost in their climb toward perfection. The small human woman with her primitive wooden instrument was teaching them what it meant to be alive. As Hannah's flute continued its haunting melody, the music began to weave a story that transcended the boundaries between species. The notes carried the scent of Earth's first campfires, the wonder in a child's eyes seeing the moon for the first time, and the determination of humans who built rockets with their bare hands to touch the stars. But then the melody grew deeper, more complex, telling of humanity's greatest struggles and triumphs. The Hive Collective, spread across an entire section of the auditorium, experienced something that shattered their understanding of existence. For millions of years, they had shared one consciousness, one purpose, one identity. But as Hannah's music spoke of individual dreams and personal loss, something impossible happened. Individual members of the collective began to feel separate. One small drone near the front suddenly understood what it meant to be alone. Another felt the sharp pain of missing someone who was gone forever. A third experienced the warm glow of a memory that belonged to no one else. The collective consciousness wavered like a candle in the wind as thousands of individual minds began to emerge from the group, each one discovering the terrifying and beautiful experience of being unique. The cloud beings, who had evolved beyond physical form centuries ago, felt an even stranger transformation. Dex, their diplomatic representative, had existed as pure thought and energy for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to have a body. But as Hannah's music told of physical embraces and the weight of grief in human hearts, something extraordinary happened. His energy form began to condense, becoming more solid than it had been in 1,000 years. For a brief moment, he could almost feel what it was like to have hands that could touch, arms that could hold, a heart that could break. The sensation was so overwhelming that sparks of light leaked from his form, creating a light show that made other cloud beings gasp in recognition of something they had lost. The melody shifted, and suddenly the entire station was filled with the story of Minho's death. Hannah's music painted the picture of a man who had carved flutes from oak trees, who had taught his wife to find music in the wind and songs in the rain. It told of his final days, when Earth's gravity felt too heavy for his failing body, and his last words, "Play for them, Hannah, play for all of them." The song didn't shy away from the pain of loss. It embraced it, made it beautiful, transformed it into something that connected rather than divided. Every being in the auditorium who had ever lost someone they loved felt that loss reflected in the music, but also felt the healing power of remembering with joy instead of only sorrow. Then the melody told of children leaving home for the first time, of young humans boarding ships to distant worlds, of families saying goodbye at spaceports knowing they might never meet again. It spoke of the courage required to leave everything familiar behind, driven by nothing more than curiosity and hope. The deep singers, ancient beings who had witnessed the birth of stars, began to weep. Their tears were not water but streams of bioluminescent fluid that flowed down their massive forms like rivers of light. They had lived so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be young, to be uncertain, to be brave enough to venture into the unknown despite fear. In the judges section, something miraculous happened to Zend. His cybernetic heart, which he had replaced with mechanical precision centuries ago after his organic one was damaged in a war, began to beat with a rhythm it had never known. The mechanical device was designed to pump his circulatory fluid at optimal efficiency, But now it was pulsing in time with Hannah's music, creating a rhythm that felt almost alive. His organic eye, which had remained dry for decades, began to produce tears. His mechanical eye, designed only to gather data, began to process something it had no programming for, beauty that served no logical purpose, yet felt more important than any calculation he had ever formed. The machine collective, beings who had uploaded their consciousness into quantum computers and abandoned biological existence entirely, experienced a system-wide anomaly. Their logic circuits, designed to process information at the speed of light, began to spark with something that defied their programming. They were feeling something that couldn't be reduced to ones and zeros, something that existed in the spaces between their calculations, their collective processing power, normally focused on solving mathematical problems and managing galactic infrastructure, suddenly turned inward. For the first time in their digital existence, they began to question not what they could compute, but why they wanted to compute it at all. Throughout the station, impossible things began to happen. Ancient enemies found themselves standing side by side, their conflicts forgotten in the face of something greater. Species that had been at war for millennia felt their anger melting away, replaced by a shared understanding of what it meant to be lost in the vastness of space. The chirring swarm, insect-like beings who communicated only through pheromones and wing sounds, found themselves trying to hum along with the melody. Their throat structures weren't designed for it, but they tried anyway, creating a buzzing harmony that added to the growing symphony. Security robots throughout the station stopped their patrols and turned toward the auditorium. Automated systems began to malfunction as their artificial intelligence networks tried to process the concept of beauty. Even the station's central computer, designed to manage millions of simultaneous operations, began to delegate processing power to analyzing the music, trying to understand why something so simple could feel so profound. The song reached its climax as it told of hope surviving in the darkest void, of love that could bridge the impossible distances between stars. It spoke of messages sent across the galaxy that might never be received, of signals beamed into space carrying nothing, but the simple declaration that someone was out there, someone was listening, someone cared. Every being in the auditorium, regardless of their species or origin, felt the universal truth that Hannah's music carried. In all the vast emptiness of space, in all the cold mathematics of the universe, the simple fact that someone could create beauty, could feel love, could hope against hopelessness, was the most important thing of all. The entire station fell silent except for the wooden flute in the hands of one small human woman. And in that moment, her music seemed to speak for every consciousness that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were truly alone in the universe. A final note from Hannah's wooden flute lingered in the air like the last star before dawn, then slowly faded into a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. 10,000 beings from across the galaxy sat frozen in their seats, processing something their advanced minds couldn't quite understand. The massive entertainment station, which moments before had been filled with mockery and laughter, now held its breath. The silence stretched on, second after second, until it felt like time itself had stopped. Hannah stood alone in the center of the vast stage, her small human form dwarfed by the cosmic displays still swirling above her head. She lowered the flute from her lips, her hands trembling slightly, and waited. Then, like a dam bursting, the recognition began. Kira was the first to move. The blue-skinned host, who had introduced Hannah as a primitive curiosity just minutes ago, slowly rose from her floating booth, for streams of clear liquid ran down her face stairs. The first her species had produced in over 1,000 years. The Kiran people had evolved beyond what they called emotional leakage centuries ago. considering tears a sign of weakness and inefficiency. But now, as she stood watching the small human woman, Kira felt something breaking open inside her chest. The tears flowed freely as she whispered words in her native language that roughly translated to I remember what it was like to feel. The effect spread like ripples across the pond. The crystalline Vex beings, whose bodies had been resonating with Hannah's music, suddenly burst into the most beautiful sound any of them had ever created. Their crystal forms chimed in perfect harmony, creating a chorus that seemed to celebrate not just the music they had heard, but the rediscovery of something precious they had thought was lost forever, the massive Vex Elder, a being whose crystal body had grown to the size of a small building over his 1,000-year lifespan, produced a sound so pure and deep that it made the station's whole vibrate. In the Vex language of harmonic frequencies, it meant teacher. You are our teacher. The orb entities, who had been pulsing softly during the music's end, suddenly blazed with light so brilliant that the station's automated systems had to dim the surrounding displays to prevent damage. To sensitive optical organs, their bioluminescent cores flared like tiny suns, creating patterns of light that spelled out messages of gratitude in languages that hadn't been used for centuries throughout the auditorium. Impossible things continued to happen. The Hive Collective, still experiencing the strange sensation of individual thoughts, began to move in patterns they had never used before. Instead of their usual precise, synchronized movements, they flowed like water, like music made visible, each individual unit contributing to a dance that celebrated both unity and uniqueness. The deep singers, ancient beings who had remained silent for most of the performance, began to produce sounds that shook the entire station. But these weren't the rumbling notes of amusement they had made earlier. These were songs of mourning for what they had lost, songs of joy for what they had found again. Songs that told the story of civilizations that had grown so advanced they had forgotten how to wonder. Even the machine collective, beings who had abandoned biological existence for the certainty of digital immortality, began to produce something unprecedented. Their drones, sleek mechanical units that normally moved with perfect efficiency, started to hum. The sound was created by minute vibrations in their metal housing, serving no logical purpose except to express something their quantum minds couldn't process but somehow needed to release. In the VIP section, the Galactic Council members' representatives of the most powerful civilizations in known space began to stand one by one. These beings, who normally made decisions that affected billions of lives with cold calculation, found themselves struggling with emotions they had engineered out of their species generations ago. The ethereal communes, beings of pure energy who rarely took physical form, began to manifest as swirling columns of light. The aquatic federations pressed against their tank walls, their flowing forms creating shapes that resembled musical notes. Even the Silicon dynasties, artificial intelligences that ruled entire star systems, began to flash messages of something that could only be called wonder. Sent. The cybernetic judge slowly stood from his floating throne. His mechanical components whirred and clicked as he processed what he had experienced, while his organic parts trembled with emotions he had thought were surgically removed centuries ago. His translator, designed to convert thoughts into precise language, began to crackle and spark as it tried to process feelings it had no programming for. He floated down to the stage, his advanced hover system carrying him toward Hannah with movements that were less precise than usual, more human. When he reached her, his voice, normally a perfect blend of organic and electronic tones, shook with something that sounded almost like tears human. He said, and the word carried a weight it had never held before, "Hanakim of Earth, You have accomplished something that our greatest scientists, our most advanced philosophers, our most powerful technologies could not achieve. The translation system broadcast his words to every being in the station. But somehow his meaning was already understood without words. You have reminded us of what we lost in our pursuit of advancement. We have spent millennia perfecting our bodies, our minds, our civilizations. We have eliminated hunger, disease, death itself. We have conquered space and time, but in doing so, we forgot the most important thing. He gestured to the audience, where beings who had been bitter enemies for centuries were now standing together. Where species that had never communicated before were somehow understanding each other perfectly. We forgot that efficiency without beauty is meaningless, that logic without love is empty, that survival without purpose is not living at all. Behind him, the other judges began to approach. The quantum consciousness, a being that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, spoke in harmonics that translated as profound gratitude. The ancient gardener, who had tended to dying civilizations across the galaxy, offered what might have been the first genuine smile his species had produced in eons. The Galactic Council began an emergency session right there in the auditorium. Representatives who normally required weeks of preparation and formal protocols to make decisions found themselves moving with unprecedented speed and unity. The vote was unanimous before it was even officially called. Humanity would not just be granted membership in the Galactic Alliance, they would be invited to serve as cultural ambassadors. Teachers who would help other species remember what they had lost in their climb toward perfection. As the decision was announced, Juno rushed onto the stage, tears streaming down his young face. The diplomat who had feared that humanity would be rejected by galactic civilization found himself embracing the elderly music teacher who had just changed the fate of every species in known space. Hannah smiled, still clutching her wooden flute, the simple instrument carved by her late husband from an earth oak tree. Round her, 10,000 beings from across the galaxy began to make sounds of appreciation, each species contributing to a symphony that had never existed before but somehow felt as ancient as the stars themselves. Spacecraft docked at the station began to flash their lights in patterns of celebration. Throughout the galaxy, the broadcast of Hannah's performance was being received by billions of beings, spreading the reminder of what it meant to be truly alive. In that moment, one small human woman with a wooden instrument had accomplished what armies and empires could not. She had united the galaxy not through conquest or negotiation, but through the simple, powerful act of sharing her heart with the universe. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth across the vast darkness between stars, and the echo of that truth can light up entire galaxies. The end.